All right, Dr. Bhaswati Bhattacharya, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'd love to start by just getting kind of your story and how you came to Ayurveda, and also just thinking about how we might start a conversation about global sustainability.
Thanks for having me, Joe. So, when I started studying at my public health program, I had just come from Tibet, 6 months of living in Tibet, which is, you know, politically part of China. And I had noticed that there were these medicines that they were using that were not the standardized medicines that I had learned about when I was doing my PhD in pharmacology and medical sciences, right? Biomedical science. And I wanted to know why they were using these medicines. And what I came to understand is that people in many different parts of the world use the medicines of their traditional ancient culture. And we call those alternative medicines in the mainstream medical system. But for them, they were the real medicines that worked. And then the drug medicines that, the white standardized pill that's FDA approved, they were around, but they weren't as popular. And I kept wondering, well, why not? Because in the mainstream US, that's what, most people use, supposedly. And so I started thinking about the other people. So when you study something like population health, global health, you're talking about the entire planet of people. So if you're only going to take the majority that are in your equation and you're not getting everyone else, then what are you actually doing? What are you including and who are you discluding? So we talk a lot about minorities, minority health, and making space for people who are not in the mainstream. But then when I was studying at Harvard, I saw that we did a lot of calculations and a lot of the numbers were just the numbers that are available. And they happen to be in North America, Europe, and a couple of the wealthy countries of Asia, like Japan and Singapore. And then there was Australia. And we didn't really include the rest of the countries. And we didn't include the South, the entire continent of South America and Africa and much of Asia. And I started thinking, well, how can we call this the whole population if you're taking like 30 out of 200 countries? And so I started thinking about the underdog, the people who don't have the rights to access of sustainability. We were just talking about your previous degree and how you were studying in Cape Town and the difference between two parts of a city and how stark the difference is, and you feel like you're migrating every time you go from one part of Cape Town to another, even now, like as of the last 10 years. So what I started studying in the population health and the denominator we included concerned me, that we're not including this entire area that is being used by people and not recognized by the mainstream. So then I dropped from Tibet, where I had been staying, into Harvard University, where it's the mecca of where the numbers get crunched and people leave Harvard and go and run the United States government. And I found that there was a lot missing. And at the time, I studied with a brilliant Oriental medical doctor that studies the placebo effect. His name is Ted Kapchuk, and he has a whole team. And he's in the School of Medicine at Harvard, so the Harvard Medical School. And he started talking about the other people that are not recognized in unconventional medicine, right? The non-mainstream. And so that stayed in my mind because when I had come down from Tibet, I'd come through Nepal, which is at that time a Hindu state, and then into Delhi, and then I'd flown to Boston. And I found that the underlying principles of Tibetan medicine included Ayurveda, which is this medical system that has been continuously practiced for over 10,000 years. Archaeologic data say it's probably closer to 15 or 20,000 years. But the medicine has been continuously handed down. So my grandfather's 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 grandfather, right, 10,000 years ago was practicing this, and it was handed down generation by generation, uninterrupted. So when you talk about reading a textbook of medicine from, let's say, like the classic ones, like Cecil or Harrison's, we talk about them. We say that's evidence-based because we know what they said. We don't redo the clinical trials ourselves. We take the data and we follow them. Ayurveda has been passing it down from teacher to student to student to student, and the students become teachers and send it out to their, their what do we say, their juniors. And so I saw this and I said, how come this is invisible in the modern world and in the American world? And then when I went to medical school, I would say, so what about traditional Chinese medicine? What about acupuncture? What about Ayurvedic medicine? What about Yoruba medicine from West Africa? And the people would look at me like I was either crazy or that I didn't, I don't know, that I had done something that was, um, you know, like treacherous, or I had committed treason because I was talking about this alternative quackery medicine. And I didn't understand why it was that way because, whereas we're having a conversation about global health, I mean, these are practiced by people across the globe. So that's where my, story started. And so I stayed with these people that practice these medicines and get good, positive clinical outcomes, but are somehow excluded from the equation.
That's an amazing story, and I want to see if we can also connect it to some of the ideas around global sustainability. You mentioned that there's kind of an ethos that goes beyond medicine, that Ayurveda kind of brings to the table and could help us think about developing a more sustainable society. Could you talk about um, some of those principles and how we might apply some of them to society today?
Yeah, I love hearing you say Ayurveda because I think it's wonderful that more people learn about it. So, Ayurveda is part of a whole group of the Vedas, and all the sciences are seamlessly connected. Whereas when you come into modern sciences, you have departments, and then they're all like at war with each other, and economics is fighting with political science, and economics is fighting with the math people, and then the chemistry people are fighting with the physics people. And Ayurveda had everything seamless. So the seed that is grown, that is saved, that is replanted in the next season depends on the soil. So there's a soil science. Now we have like agronomy, soil science, seed, like there's all different botany, right? There's like 20 different departments around farming. Ayurveda said, look, that seed needs to be planted in the right soil, and that needs to be watched in this way, fed in this way, with this kind of water, with this kind of um, condition. And then that has to be harvested at this time in this way. And that's going to be medicine. Let's create it this way, whether it's a food or it's a medicinal herb, and then give that to patients and let them heal. And they developed this technology over like thousands of years. And so in the textbooks that are captured now that we use, there's, like 6 main textbooks, but there's a whole group. There's 57 actual accepted by the Indian government and the parts of the world that practice Ayurveda. That idea of connectedness and global sustainability with the biodiversity that we need on the planet and in that area, in that ecosystem, so we can grow that plant, the clean water, the way that needs to grow to bring it down to becoming a medicine. That is part and parcel of Ayurveda. You cannot have Ayurvedic medicines if you don't know how to grow plants. So in Ayurveda, it's not a separate science. You don't go and get the plant and say that's disconnect from Ayurveda. The way it's grown, the way the medicine is made, the water in the area, is it clean water? Where is it sourced from? And the variety of things that are like in the Farmer's Almanac, the tides and the lunar cycles, all of that is part of making Ayurvedic medicine happen. But Ayurveda itself is a philosophy that says there's an ecosystem and there are balances and imbalances. And the balances are not just in the seed and the soil and the environment, but it's also in everything that lives on it, including the animals, the plants, and the humans. So if I'm going to stay in balance, then the environment has to be in balance. And if this gets slightly off balance, or I get slightly off balance, then we have to find a way to get ourselves back into balance by using each other. And that ecosystem is an integral part of Ayurveda.
Yeah. Something you mentioned when we were talking before was that the plants we breathe the same air that the plants around us breathe. And in Western culture, we've probably heard, a lot of people have probably heard about like the value of local honey when you're sick, but that's it's more than that, right? There are all of the plants and all of the water around us being local to us. There's value to um, sourcing our food locally, and how do you think about that, and also think about kind of that local mindset in the context of global sustainability?
Yeah. So if you go to places like you're living in Virginia, in California, in Oregon, there are people that do regenerative farming where they're regenerating the soil that's been depleted. They are planting certain things, not A next to B next to C by the name of the plant, but things that naturally grow next to each other. And this plant might grow and be a natural insect repellent that would affect this plant. So you grow them near each other, and this helps this plant. You have like the neem tree. The neem tree has very powerful antimicrobials. And so the neem tree was always planted on the eastern side of the house so that the person that goes out in the morning to the morning sun would go past the neem tree, and the air around the neem tree had these antimicrobial chemicals in the air that would actually prevent mosquitoes and other insects from coming into the house when the door was opened. So that idea that certain plants need to grow together, the idea that you need to regenerate the soil by having like earthworms or composting. These kind of things are now fashionable in America, but that philosophy of using these concepts that are part of farming and inculcating that into the way we produce medicines to become, part of our health, part of our population's health in a non-expensive way. It's just a choice, right? If you put this here, it's just a decision you made to plant the tree here versus here, but it can have large economic consequences that you don't have to buy certain like insecticides or pest killers. And so those kind of decisions are about the intelligence. Ayurveda believes in that intelligence of the ecosystem to inform us as humans so we can live a better life.
That's super interesting, and I'm curious how we or what your thoughts are on how we can kind of scale up ecological wisdom and get more people bought into, or maybe it's winning over hearts and minds, or integrating it into medical school education. But what are your thoughts on how we advance or scale up ideas of Ayurveda?
So the best way is to start when kids are kids, young, and teach them about the doshas and the philosophy of being close to the earth. And instead of going home and playing video games on the computer, to go out into nature and go play and watch, the bees building a nest, or the bird with the little eggs, and then watching every day and going and visiting and coming back and reporting, Mom, I watched this birdie and it's building like all these sticks and branches, and it's making a nest. And then the next day, oh, and there's eggs in the nest. Kids find discovery of the world through watching nature, and that's the way that the last thousands of years have been, minus the last 25 years when kids got really into handheld devices and computer games. They would go and follow nature. They had a backyard, or they had a street they could play on, or they had a forest nearby. And I think that's a lot of where, if you start there, maybe you grew up in that. I did. I was in India, I was in California, I was in Nebraska. My parents lived in Europe, Germany, UK. Everywhere I remember, my childhood memories are filled with nature and forests and lakes and mountainside. And when we lived in Nebraska, we had a farm. And so um, if you start there, then like that's why I have this philosophy I do. I naturally gravitate toward nature because that's my childhood. That's where I would find, recentering and peace. If you go to the hospitals in West Africa or in India, they have access to the outside. They have a garden. They see trees. All the hospitals I worked in, which were among the best in the world, Harvard, Penn, Columbia, University of Chicago. These were all in urban areas where absolutely there were no real plants, and there was no forest, and there was no real access to tree made air, like the actual oxygen from trees. it was all artificial air conditioned space, and very whitewashed, metal based things, nothing organic, no wood. And so if you grow up in that kind of a situation, you're going to think that that's the way things should be. But if you grow up in nature, you will think differently. So I think the solution would be to start with primary school, to get kids to learn how to grow things, like taking those egg cartons and grow, like putting soil in and growing plants. I remember the first time I watched a plant come out from the soil, I was so excited that I had actually gotten a plant to grow. And I think every kid has that sense of discovery. If you then carry that on to medical school and you say, look, there are these developed medical systems. And if you can learn the meridians and learn about acupuncture and see that when you put a needle into that particular point, you're going to have this predictable consequence. You can prognosticate disease. You can make a prognosis about how this disease or this pain is going to change. These are predictable because this system has been developed for thousands of years and also over millions of people. Ayurveda has it. Traditional Chinese medicine has it. Kampo, which is Japanese version, Korean medicine, Amazonian medicine. There's so many. Celtic and Gaelic medicine from the old Northern Europeans and the way that they understood medicinal plants. All the indigenous peoples, the First Nation people and the Native Americans who knew so much about the plants that grow in North America. How are you going to access that unless you learn about its existence? And so exposing medical school students to that, I tried to do that when I was in medical school, and I was told there's already too much in the curriculum. We don't have time to teach that. And I would say, when you're busy, all you have to do is change from one brain to the other side, right? So if you're using this side of your brain all day, like your left side's your logic side, and you're hammering in all this information all day, why don't you take a break by having a tour of an arboretum or going out and spending time walking in the forest and just experiencing life? People can learn all the time and not be stressed out if they use different parts of their brain. And part of it is just experiencing nature. And I think that's the biggest thing that's missing in medical school. Another part is learning about cooking. So you were talking about plant-based diet. Imagine if we got into college and instead of orientation, which is about getting drunk, getting high, and like all kinds of unleashed, what do they call that?
Inhibitions or
Yeah, exactly. Like there was like what do they call that week? Orientation week. And then they would say it's actually disorientation week because, everyone's doing all kinds of stuff that's, as you said, getting rid of their inhibitions. Instead, if they would say, we don't have to be goody two shoes, but how about learning how to live efficiently? How about learning how to study? How about learning how to make your own food? Wouldn't it be wonderful if, a few of us could cook, like 2 of us cook for everyone, and then 8 people eat together and 2 people cook every night. 4 nights out of the week, you cook one night, you get to eat for 3 nights. How great would that be? And that's how a lot of kibbutzes and ashrams work, that they have community sharing. And then you'd have clean food that is not processed from some like truck and boxes and microwaves. You'd have clean actual food, and that would enhance your studying. That would enhance your brain capacity. We don't do that for people. Right now, 40% of Americans have irritable bowel syndrome, likely because of the food products they're eating and not actual clean homemade foods. So where would I start with Ayurveda? Whether it's the acupuncture, the predecessor of acupuncture is called marma therapy. And the surgeon Shushruta talks about marma points and how if you touch particular points of the body, they can actually alleviate stress and orient the energy flowing through the body. The energy of pain or the energy of disbalance can be moved into energy of balance. Foods, farming, being out in nature. Forest bathing is called Shinrin-yoku by the Japanese. And this bathing in the energy of the forest is part of Ayurveda. Farming. So all these aspects we're talking about, imagine if a doctor in training, a physician in training were to learn these things, how it would reshape their thinking to say, okay, instead of just drugs and surgery and tests, maybe we'll also have lifestyle and movement, dance, exercise, pickleball, swimming, And we'll also have different kinds of lifestyle, healthy relationships, right? That are part of stress resilience. Instead of addiction to alcohol and cannabis and all the stuff that's out there in colleges, how about having an addiction to going out and having a walk in nature, an addiction to having 8,000 steps a day, an addiction to positive relationships and resolving, ego problems? What if that was the basis of how people went through medical school? I think our patients would get the benefits of that.
Yeah, that's a powerful vision. I hope that resonates with people. One of the things you just mentioned that really resonated with me was the power of community, and thinking about maybe also the architecture of our hospitals now are so bland, and somehow integrating nature into the architecture of hospitals and thinking about what a community hospital in nature might look like. That's really powerful to me. Uh,
And global
yeah.
health. A friend of mine, her name is Donna Karen. She's a clothes designer. So she has a lot of money. So she funded one of the hospitals in New York to have healthy environment. And she had to start with one floor because it's very expensive to redecorate everything. So she picked the cancer floor and she reoriented the design because she's a natural, gifted designer. And she changed it so that it would be more nature based. The colors, instead of being like blanche white and like bland, had plants and natural things that even if you can't have the plants because of allergies, you could have plant motifs on the walls. You could have ferns. You could have those plants that eat spores from fungus that are very good, like the peace lily. And having natural fabrics, having things that are more nature made, bigger windows. And so she helped redesign the cancer floor. And it was a great effort. And there are several groups in America that work with what's called optimum living environments and optimal hospital environments. There's a whole movement to take, these, one group is called Plane Tree. There's a whole bunch of Cancer Centers of America, so many groups that are trying to change that environment. And that's part of global health. And if we could integrate these parts, into the vision, as you said, I just see that population health is not just about prevention of disease. It's
Mm.
about creating a philosophy that people will think about health more than about disease. There's an institute called the Global Wellness Institute, and its founder, Susie, says, we're very good at measuring disease, but it just seemed like wellness was not a priority. Oh, who wants to look at people taking care of themselves? Spa, movement, sauna. How much time do they spend getting away from the overworking workaholic environment and going into retreat, having digital detox spaces where you go into nature and don't take your phone with you, and your phone doesn't work because there's no Wi-Fi? How about those kind of interventions? Who's measuring them? And no one was. So she started measuring them, and she created a metric where people now, instead of just measuring disease, how much did the blood pressure go down? How much did the liver, function test go down? How much did these disease parameters go down? She started measuring, what do people do to get well? And the Global Wellness Institute has been tracking this for over a decade. And one of its principals, Beth Gransky, is tracking by country, what people are doing. And now wellness is actually becoming a part of the public health calculations. And how do we look at population health and not just population disease? So it's an exciting time because people are looking into all different options, but with metrics. So it can be measured by the people that are saying, well, if we can't measure it, then we can't fund it.
Hmm. Well, that leads me to another question that I had about how technology can play a role in advancing some of these ideas. And you mentioned, what we can measure, and thinking about maybe opportunities with big data. Or do you have any thoughts on how we might utilize like artificial intelligence or machine learning or any of those types of newer technologies?
Yeah, so there are people, let's take traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda as an example, and then we'll talk about public health. Public health has lots of data, and we have a lot of ways of, you know, massaging the data and transforming it into all kinds of conclusions. There's lots of people working on that. There's a lesser number of people working with the huge pharmacopoeia of traditional Chinese medicine, the knowledge of the clinical practitioners using Tui Na or acupuncture or moxibustion, and saying, okay, if we do this and we use this plant, this is the outcome. Let's track all the different outcomes. Let's do these data collecting studies. And since there's so much, because these systems have been around for thousands of years, let's take textbooks that talk about how this particular procedure or herb would work, and let's codify it. And then let's put that into practice today. And then as we see patients today, let's use artificial intelligence to track how that medicine used today in this kind of patient with these parameters, this age or this level of lab tests or this disease state. Let's take that and then do a large calculation like actuarial data do, right? They take huge amounts of people that work in jobs and they say, okay, what's your risk if you work in this job for a heart attack? All right, we have 1 million people that are insured. Let's see how many of them had heart attacks by the age of 55, by the age of 65, by the age of 70. How many had blood pressure problems? How many people develop blood pressure between the age of 40 and 45 or 45 and 50? And they have all these data because people get annual physicals and they can use artificial intelligence. That's mainstream. If you take Ayurveda, Ayurveda also has huge amounts of data from not only the books, but Ayurveda is not an ancient system. It's a modern system too, because it's been continuously practiced from, thousands, tens of thousands of years ago through today, continuously. So there are people that were born in the 30s, 40s, 50s who have been seeing patients for at least 50 years. And they can say, oh, yes, I've seen more than, I've delivered 15,000 babies. I've delivered, or I've done these surgeries, or I've done this kind of treatment on cancer patients. And even though we call them case series and don't call them really hard scientific evidence, there are lots of data that this particular, let's say, herbal mineral, which is, a boon for Indians because it replenishes minerals back to the body and helps cure cancers. Of course, the mainstream people don't want you to say that, but, on the horizon, NIH is looking at it, and other people are looking at it because it does work for impossible conditions. And you can track those data. And then you could say, let's use artificial learning to track, 3,000, 5,000 doctors that are using this and seeing what parameters those patients had, what medicines were used, and then what the outcomes were. So it's called PICO. It's an acronym for the way that patient outcomes can be studied. So the patient, the intervention, the condition, and the outcome. And so when you look at the individualized care that Ayurveda gives, because there's so many parameters, there's so much variability. There's a shloka that captures 10 variables, and every Ayurvedic doctor memorizes. Dushyam, Desham, Balam, Kalam, Anala, Prakriti, Vayasattva, Satmya, Ahara. So these are all 10 parameters of everything to individualize to the patient. And think about how many combinations there are, right? Just do the combinatorial mathematics and you'll see that every single patient, if like one thing goes different, you can change the medicine and still get a very precise effect. Artificial intelligence can take that kind of variability and map it and then do treatments. And that's going to give us a way of personalizing medicine that you can't do otherwise. I mean, like by hand, right? By hand. So that's a place where artificial intelligence can really have space. And there are people doing it. So I just learned last week about a few traditional Chinese medicine practitioners that are creating databases. I've started working with a man who is in cybersecurity and has been running lots of software to create like solutions for people in medical centers who need firewalls and security and all the variables, right? For like, let's say you having access to a particular patient's chart versus me versus someone else and all the different data points. And he has started taking those Ayurvedic physicians and asking them, okay, how would you make this decision? And how do we, like, what are the options for that? And then if you say yes here, right, the decision tree, right? Analysis, and then what are all the different possibilities, and creating a matrix like this. So it's fun for me as a project to use artificial intelligence, especially for an area like Ayurveda, because it has such amazing clinical outcomes in places where I, as an MD, have never seen in my, my mainstream medical practice. But I see when I combine Ayurveda, which has about 25 different modalities. We talked about diet, we talked about the herbal mineral medicines, we talked about exercise. There's yoga as a therapy, there's yoga breath work, there's yoga meditation. There are herbal medicines that we talked about, but there's a whole span of using different modalities within Ayurveda. And imagine taking all those modalities and then all those 10 factors I described, and then all the different patients, and running that through a computer-based learning. I think there's a lot of stuff we can do. And I would like to say that between the work of Global Wellness Institute, tracking how well people are, getting metrics for how well you are and not how diseased you are, I think the future, could use ancient medicines. And if we can respect the earth more and have biodiversity and the intelligence of, our ancient wisdom systems, and also our modern electronic machine learning systems, I think there's a lot we can do.
Well, I think you've outlined an incredible vision for the future. I wonder if, just as like a last question, if you were asked to kind of summarize what a vision of the future might be, utilizing some of these things that we've talked about, what would be your optimistic, idealistic vision for how we could move forward as a society?
So the US society is right now in flux, as you know, since you live in the DC area. One of the interesting things that was commented on by one of my previous professors from Harvard, there's a lot of people that are now pundits and they're all making comments, but the people that are running the country right now, one has an Indian background, one has a Turkish background, one has an Iranian background, one has a white male, mainstream American background. You have a bunch of people from different cultures coming together. But what's interesting is that many of them actually use holistic medicine in their practice of like everyday living. So one of my patients is a friend of Melania Trump. And Melania, absolutely, being from Eastern Europe, she absolutely advocates for herbal medicines and a lot of the non-conventional treatments. RFK, we already know, does. Mehmet Oz had a television show that, explored all kinds of remedies. They are not people that are saying orthodox mainstream medicine is the way, the only way, and my way or the highway. They're saying, well, what if there are other possibilities? What if there are ways to take holistic medicines and make them available for people? So there are online health consultations. I'm sure you've seen the apps that are online. There's about, I would say, a good 40 different apps right now that allow people to have online health, so that if you're a cancer patient, you can't be around, like a lot of dirt and immunocompromised people because you'll get sick. Or if you've got an injury and you can't walk, or you're a cancer patient, you're really weak, you're tired, or you're a young mother and you've got babies at home, you can't get to the doctor. Online health consultations are giving you that possibility, right? But most of them are doing mainstream stuff. A few of them have said, here's your mainstream. Oh, and we'll also give you the option of education about these supplements. Dietary supplements in the USA are a huge part of how people access health. And the agency that I have the right over my body is a basic American value. So if I want to take vitamin C, I have the right to take it. If I think that melatonin is going to help me sleep, I have the right to go and get it and try it on myself. So if you have someone to help you figure out how much melatonin, what else you need to do, like the best thing you can do before you take your melatonin is turn the freaking lights off. Everyone has their lights shining bright in the evening. You're supposed to fall asleep about 2.5 hours after the natural sunlight of dusk, right, fades. So if you turn on the light and you've got bright lights on your computer screen or the lights above, you're not going to fall asleep as easily. That's part of the insomnia crisis we have. Turn the lights down. And then if you want to take melatonin, take it and see what happens. So all of these different, what should we say, integration of different possibilities, advice are outside of the mainstream drugs, 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 surgery, surgery, interventions, tests, tests. And these are all other things we can do. So what I see as the future is more and more people voting with their feet and saying, I don't like the side effects. The doctor didn't tell me how to do this. I got a 3-minute visit with the doctor. I couldn't understand a lot of what, she said. So I'm going to go to people who can explain things to me, who have a bedside manner, who can give me other options, who can tell me where I can get acupressure or do Tai Chi or integrate different kinds of movement into my life. And oh my gosh, I noticed that my, XYZ symptom went away. Pain, chronic pain, 26% of the American population are living in chronic pain. Mm. If you have that alleviated, it doesn't matter whether it's a pill or whether it's a non-mainstream. I just want my pain to go away. If we can alleviate that in people using the combination of like online health consultations, people that are advising, dietary supplements, and self-medicated like oil treatments or food-based, you mentioned plant-based diets before. What if that helps heal people? And what if that's the future of medicine? Americans have always taken and voted with their feet. They take the best of what they find in the world and they bring it home. If we can do that, we can change a lot of this crisis that requires economic input, right? If you grow plants, it just takes water, air, soil, and sun. So right now, we don't have to pay for the sun. We don't have to pay, well, in California, we pay for water, but in the rest of the country, probably we don't. And you could grow plants rather than paying for pills. Like, what would that do for people in terms of the economic crisis we're in for healthcare? It would transform it, right? Native Americans did that. They still do it in the, on the reservations and in the First Nation. So I think that could be the future if enough people wake up and say, no, I'm going to choose regenerative farming. No, I'm going to choose aromatherapy. I just learned about, these plant-based recipes. I'm going to go make them instead of eating out. You can transform the economics of health very quickly. You just need this thing that's called BS, the belief systems. Until you can shift people's belief systems, you're not going to be able to do anything. And once you do, you can't stop them. So we have millions of Americans today. You're never going to be able to take their agency away from them. They have chosen holistic healthcare. They're going to do it. And so that's what I predict for global health and global sustainability as a positive, way of looking to the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for taking the time to talk to me. And I hope we can have another conversation again in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. Namaste.